My grandson's baptism was supposed to be the proudest day of my life. Instead, my daughter-in-law sent me a text at 9:47 p.m. on a Sunday telling me I'd been rescheduled out of the ceremony because my presence didn't match the aesthetic. 6 words she used: aesthetic, rescheduled, out. Like I was a meeting on her calendar she could drag to the trash. My name is Wallace Thornberry. I'm 67 years old. I built Thornberry Holdings from a single rental property in Dorchester to a commercial real estate portfolio worth north of $200 million. I started carrying drywall for my father's contracting company when I was 14. I bought my first triple-decker in Roxbury in 1981, with money I saved working double shifts at the Four River Shipyard. 43 years of getting up before sunrise. 43 years of calloused hands and contracts negotiated over coffee at diners in Quincy and Brockton. And on a Sunday night in October, the woman married to my only son told me I wasn't refined enough to watch my grandson get baptized. Before I tell you what I did, I want you to subscribe to this channel. Stories like this matter. Real consequences for real disrespect. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I promise every grandparent listening right now knows exactly what this feels like. The slow, polite erasure. The way they let you pay but won't let you sit at the table. Let me back up. My son Garrison is 34. He's a good boy. Always was. Quiet, thoughtful. The kind of kid who'd help his mother carry groceries in without being asked. He went to Boston College on my dime, finished his JD at Georgetown, and came back home to practice tax law at a mid-sized firm downtown. His mother Lorraine died of pancreatic cancer in 2019. The two of us got closer after that. Sunday dinners at my place in Milton. Every week, without fail. He'd bring a bottle of red, and we'd watch the Pats lose and talk about his cases. Then he met Cordelia. Cordelia Pelham Ashcroft. The hyphen alone should have been a warning. She came from one of those Beacon Hill families that traces itself back to passengers on a boat from 1635 and never shuts up about it. Her father, Sterling Pelham Ashcroft, sits on the board of 3 private clubs, 2 of which I happen to own the buildings underneath. Her mother runs a foundation that gives away other people's money and takes credit for it. Cordelia is beautiful. I'll give her that. She's also the coldest person I've ever sat across from at a dinner table. The first time Garrison brought her to Milton, she walked through my house like she was appraising it for a teardown. She picked up a framed photo of Lorraine and me on Cape Cod and said, "Oh, this is sweet. Is this from when you used to vacation?" Used to, like Lorraine being dead meant we downgraded from vacationing to existing. I let it slide. I let a lot of things slide for Garrison. They got married in 2022. I paid for half. Sterling Pelham Ashcroft paid for the other half by, I later learned, taking a second mortgage on the house in Louisburg Square he'd inherited from his grandmother. But I didn't know that at the time. At the time, I was just the loud guy from Dorchester with the wrong watch. When my grandson, Theodore, was born last December, something in me cracked open. I don't have words for it. I'd been a father, but being a grandfather is something else entirely. I drove up to Mass General on a Tuesday morning at 4 a.m. Because Cordelia had gone into labor early. I sat in that waiting room for 9 hours. When Garrison came out and said, "Dad, you want to meet your grandson?" I cried. Right there in front of the nurses. I cried like I hadn't cried since Lorraine's funeral. I bought Theodore a college fund the next morning, $300,000, preloaded, for a baby who was 11 hours old. I bought him a crib hand-built by an old furniture maker I knew in New Hampshire. I bought a house in Wellesley 2 months later, 3 blocks from Garrison and Cordelia's place, so I could be near my grandson. I sold the Milton house I'd lived in for 26 years. The house where Lorraine and I had raised our boy. Looking back now, I see exactly what I was doing. I was trying to buy my way into being important to them. I was doing what I'd done my whole life. When I felt out of place, I wrote a check. The baptism was set for the 2nd Sunday in October. The Church of the Advent in Beacon Hill. Reception to follow at the Pelham Ashcroft House, catered by a place called Verdant on Charles Street that charges $300 a head for what they call harvest forward dining. I'd seen the invoice. I'd seen all the invoices. $65,000 total, for a 4-hour event for a baby who couldn't yet hold his own head up. I paid for every penny of it. I didn't ask to. Cordelia's mother sent me a budget consultation document in August. That's what she called it. 16 pages, bound, itemized like a real estate deal. The cover letter said something about how the Pelham Ashcrofts had incurred significant, unexpected obligations that year and would deeply appreciate Wallace's stewardship of the financial particulars. Stewardship. Like I was managing their estate. I called Garrison. He was apologetic but firm. Dad, it would mean a lot. They're a little stretched. You know how it is. I knew how it was. So I wrote the check. I should have asked questions then. I should have asked, if they're stretched, why are we doing a $65,000 baptism? But Garrison was my son, and Theodore was my grandson, and I'd have written it twice if they asked. The text came on October 6th, 1 week before the ceremony. Cordelia's number. 9:47 p.m. I was watching the Sunday night football game in my Wellesley living room. Wallace, after extensive discussion with the family, we've decided to streamline the guest list for the baptism and reception. Your presence didn't match the aesthetic we've been building with Father Caldwell and the photographer. We've rescheduled you out of the day. We hope you'll join us at a private dinner sometime in November to celebrate Theodore. Thank you for understanding. C. I read it 3 times. Then I read it again. She didn't even use my full name. Wallace, like I was a second cousin she vaguely remembered. The aesthetic. My grandson's baptism had an aesthetic and I wasn't in it. Father Caldwell had been consulted about whether I should attend my own grandson's baptism. Rescheduled out. I want to tell you I exploded. I want to tell you I called her right back and gave her a piece of my mind. But the truth is, I just sat there. The TV was on, but I couldn't hear it anymore. I sat on that couch for 40 minutes and I didn't move. I just held my phone and stared at those words. Then I called Garrison. He didn't pick up. I called again. Voicemail. A text came through about 20 minutes later. Dad, I know you got Cordelia's message. Can we talk tomorrow? It's late and I'm exhausted. Late. I'd been at his hospital bedside 34 years ago when his pediatrician didn't think he'd make it through the night with pneumonia. I'd been late then too. I never left. I texted back. Tell me yes or no. Are you in agreement with this? It took him an hour to answer. It's complicated, Dad. Let's talk tomorrow. That was my answer. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table and I made a list. I'm a businessman. When something doesn't make sense, I make a list. I wrote down everything I'd paid for since Theodore was born. The college fund. The crib. The house. The first-year pediatrician retainer at the boutique practice they'd insisted on, the nanny share, the custom nursery, the baptism gown that I now realized was $3,000 from a place in London, the reception, the flowers, the catering, the string quartet they'd hired to play Bach during the ceremony, $460,000 in 10 months. And underneath that number, I wrote another one. The number I'd known, but never quite let myself see, $612,000 I'd given Garrison and Cordelia since the wedding. Down payment help on their Wellesley house. Furniture. 2 cars. A career sabbatical of Cordelia's that lasted 14 months and involved a lot of trips to Provence. Just over $1 million in a little under 3 years. Around 4 a.m., I called my assistant Beverly. Beverly's been with me since 1998. She was a secretary at the law firm I used for my first big acquisition, and I poached her with a ridiculous salary and a promise that I'd never raise my voice at her. I've kept that promise. She runs my office, my schedule, and a quiet portion of my soul. She picked up on the second ring. Wallace, it's 4 in the morning. I know. I'm sorry. Are you up? I am now. What's wrong? I told her. I read her the text. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Beverly said something I'll never forget. She said, Wallace, I have known you for 26 years. In that time, you have ended business relationships with men richer than God for less than this. Why is your daughter-in-law allowed to do what no business partner could? I didn't have an answer. She said, I'll be at the office at 7. Bring me everything you have on the baptism, every contract, every vendor, every payment. We're going to take a look at exactly what you've been funding. I want to tell you about Beverly for a second. People hear executive assistant, and they picture someone bringing coffee. Beverly is 61. She has a master's in financial planning from Bentley. She has more than once found a discrepancy in a deal worth $50 million by reading a footnote nobody else read. She is the most underestimated person in any room she walks into, and she likes it that way. I got to the office at 6:30 with a leather folder under my arm. By 8, Beverly had spread documents across the entire conference table. By 9, she was making phone calls. By 10, she'd handed me a single sheet of paper with a list on it. Every vendor for the baptism. Every one of them. She looked at me over her reading glasses and she said, Wallace, I want to ask you something. Did you know that the church the baptism is being held at is currently negotiating a lease for office space in your building on Tremont? I blinked. What? The Episcopal Diocese is consolidating their administrative offices. 3 months ago, they signed an LOI for the 3rd and 4th floors of 240 Tremont. Closings scheduled for November 15th. You're the landlord. I sat down. She kept going. The caterer, Verdant, they've used Thornberry Real Estate as their commercial broker for the last 6 years. You personally handle their account. You renegotiated their lease on Charles Street last spring. I remember. The Florist is a small operation called Bramble & Ball. They lease their studio space from you in the South End. The low market, because you wanted to support a woman-owned small business. Right. The string quartet. The lead violinist's husband works for you. He's a senior leasing agent in your Cambridge office. You wrote a letter that helped his daughter get into Phillips Exeter. I just stared at her. The photographer, Thaddeus Quincy. You've known him for 15 years. You hired him for the company's 25th anniversary gala. He shoots all our annual reports. I had to lean back in my chair. In the venue, Wallace. The Pelham Ashcroft House. The reception is at their home, which means you don't have a venue to lean on. Except. She paused. Except I pulled their property records yesterday after you called. The mortgage on that house was refinanced in 2021. The note is held by Commonwealth Heritage Bank. And you sit on the board of Commonwealth Heritage Bank, Wallace. I closed my eyes. I want to be careful how I say this next part. Because what Beverly was laying out for me wasn't a plan. It was a map of the world I'd built without even noticing it. In Boston commercial real estate, you don't do business in a vacuum. You do favors. You hold leases. You write letters. You sit on boards. And after 43 years, every single vendor my daughter-in-law had hired for my grandson's baptism was, in some small or significant way, sitting in the lap of my empire. Cordelia didn't know. She'd hired the most expensive, most appropriate vendors in Boston, the way her mother had taught her to. She didn't know that the most expensive, most appropriate vendors in Boston were the ones who came up through my world. Old Boston is a small town wearing a city's clothes. You can't go 100 yards without bumping into someone you owe or someone who owes you. Beverly looked at me. Wallace, I'm not going to tell you what to do. But I will tell you this. If a business partner had done to you what your daughter-in-law just did, you would not be sitting here asking what to do. You'd already have done it. I called Garrison at 11 a.m. He picked up on the first ring this time. Dad, I'm so glad you called. Look, I know last night was rough. Cordelia handled it badly. The text was... it was a lot. But the spirit of the thing, Garrison, I cut him off, is the spirit of the thing that I'm not invited to my grandson's baptism. A long pause. Dad, the Pelham Ashcrofts have their traditions. The ceremony at the Advent is very formal. Father Caldwell does these very specific yes or no, son. Am I welcome at my grandson's baptism? He didn't answer. I said, Garrison, I have asked you a yes or no question. Take all the time you need, but I am going to wait on this phone until you give me a yes or no. The pause stretched. I counted breaths. I counted to 40. Finally, he said, very quietly, Cordelia's mother feels strongly that the day should reflect a family's traditions. She thinks your style might create discomfort for some of the guests. Father Caldwell agreed to a smaller, more intimate ceremony. Dad, the live stream is going to be beautiful. They're using 2 cameras. I let that hang there. 2 cameras. So I could watch in high definition as my grandson was baptized in my absence. I said, Garrison, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to let you go. Did you fight for me? Silence. Did you tell your wife and her mother that your father, the man who paid for everything that's going to happen on Sunday, deserved to be in that church? He said. Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I said, son, you just answered me. I hung up. I sat in my office and I looked out the window at Boston Harbor. I thought about Lorraine. She died on a Tuesday morning in October, in a hospital room overlooking the same harbor. The last thing she said to me, the day before she went under and never came back, was, Wally, don't let our boy forget where he comes from. I'd let him forget. I'd let him forget by paying for everything. I'd let him forget by smoothing every road. I let him forget by buying my way into rooms instead of standing at the door and waiting to be let in. Every check I wrote was another inch of distance between Garrison and the man I was trying to be for him. Beverly knocked on the door. What do you want to do, Wallace? I said. Get me Sterling Pelham Ashcroft on the phone. She raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? No. Get me his daughter-in-law first. The one who runs his office. What's her name? Bettina Pelham Ashcroft. Sterling's daughter-in-law from his first son. Yes. Get her on the phone. I want to talk to her, not him. Beverly smiled just slightly and went out. 2 minutes later, my line buzzed. Bettina Pelham Ashcroft picked up like a woman who managed a man too important to answer his own phone. Polite, polished, slightly bored. Mr. Thornberry, to what do I owe the pleasure? I said. Bettina, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want a straight answer. How is your family's mortgage payment looking this quarter? The temperature on the line dropped 20 degrees. She said, I'm sorry, I said. Commonwealth Heritage Bank, the note on the Lewisburg Square house. I sit on the board. I'm asking you, business to business, how that account looks. There was a very long silence. I let it sit. She said slowly, Mr. Thornberry, I'm not sure why you'd be asking about that. I'll tell you why. Your sister-in-law sent me a text last night uninviting me for my grandson's baptism. I'm trying to understand the financial position of the family that decided I wasn't sophisticated enough to attend a ceremony I'm paying for. So I'd like to know, are the Pelham Ashcrofts current on their obligations? Another silence. Then she said, Mr. Thornberry, that's not a question I'm in a position to discuss. I said, Bettina, I think you and I both know the answer. Have a good afternoon. I hung up. Beverly came back in. She said, Well, I said, they're behind on the mortgage. How do you know? Because she didn't deny it. Now, I want to be clear about something. I had no intention of foreclosing on Sterling Pelham Ashcroft's house. I'm not that man. I've never been that man. But what I needed Sterling and his wife and his daughter to understand was that the world they were so casually shutting me out of, the old money Boston they had taken for granted, did not actually belong to them anymore. It hadn't for a long time. They were tenants in a city I helped own. I told Beverly to start making calls. I told her exactly what to say. We weren't going to threaten anyone. We weren't going to be cruel. We were going to be honest, We were going to call every vendor and we were going to ask them, plainly, if they were comfortable providing services for an event from which the man paying for those services had been excluded. We were going to let them make their own choices. Beverly started at noon. Father Caldwell at the Church of the Advent took her call at 12:14 p.m. Beverly told him the situation. There was a long silence. Then, Father Caldwell asked if he could call Beverly back. He called back at 1:30. He'd spoken with the bishop. He said, "Mrs. Mathis, Hargrove, the Episcopal Church, does not believe a sacrament should be performed under the conditions you've described. We will perform Theodore's baptism, but the family must first make their peace with Mr. Thornberry. If they cannot, the ceremony will be postponed." Just like that, Patricia at Verdon Catering took the call at 1:45 p.m. Beverly explained. Patricia, who'd had dinner at my house 6 times, who'd cried in my office when her mother died, said, "Beverly, I'm sick. I'm sick about this. We can't continue this booking. I'll call them and I'll tell them. Tell Wallace I'm sorry. Bramble and Beau, the florist. Her name is Maeve. She runs her shop with 2 part-time employees and a high school kid who delivers." Beverly explained. Maeve started crying on the phone. She said, "Tell Mr. Thornberry I'll cancel. He gave me my start. I won't take $1 from a wedding that excludes him." "Baptism," Beverly corrected gently. "Whatever it is, I won't do it." Thaddeus Quincy, the photographer, my friend of 15 years, said, "Beverly, are you kidding me? Wallace got cut from his own grandson's baptism? I'm out. Tell him I'm out, and tell him I'll come over to his house tonight if he needs a friend." The String Quartet. The leasing agent's wife, Heather. She picked up the phone herself and she said, "Beverly, please tell Wallace we're withdrawing. I can't believe this. I'm so sorry. We'll refund the deposit." By 4 p.m., every single vendor for Sunday's baptism had withdrawn. Cordelia's phone, I would later learn, had started buzzing at around 2015. By 5 p.m., she'd had 11 calls. Verdant first, then the church, then the florist, then the photographer, then the violinist, then the rental company that was supplying chairs and linens, which Beverly had also called, then a backup caterer they'd tried to hire in a panic, who turned out to share a kitchen space with Verdant, and who, when she heard what had happened, declined the booking on the spot. It wasn't because I had power over them. It was because they were good people, and I had spent 43 years being good to them, and they remembered. At 5:23 p.m., my phone rang. Cordelia. I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave one. It rang again at 5:27. Sterling Pelham Ashcroft. I let that one go too. It rang again at 5:34. Garrison. I answered. He said, Dad, what did you do?" I said, "Son, I didn't do anything. I asked some questions and other people made decisions. Cordelia's in pieces. Her mother is on the phone with the church right now. Father Caldwell won't take her call. What did you say to him?" "I didn't speak to Father Caldwell, Garrison. Beverly did. She told him the truth. He made his own decision. You can't do this. Theodore's baptism is in 5 days. I haven't done anything. The vendors made choices about whether they wanted to work for people who'd excluded the man paying for the event. They chose. That's not on me. Dad, please. Please. We can fix this. I'll talk to Cordelia." I said, "Garrison, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I am not going to fix anything. I am not going to make any phone calls. I am not going to undo anything. The only person who can fix this is your wife. And the only way she can fix it is by inviting me, in person, to my grandson's baptism. That's not going to happen, Dad." Her mother, "Then there will be no baptism on Sunday." That's not me. That's the world I built. Telling your wife's family that you can't disrespect a man and then expect his money to keep flowing. I hung up. I want to take a breath here, because the next part is hard. That night, around 9, my front door buzzer rang. I looked at the camera. It was Garrison, standing on my front porch in the rain, alone. I let him in. He didn't say anything for a long time. He stood in my foyer dripping, and he looked at the floor. Then he looked up and he said, "Dad, Mom would be ashamed of me." I said, "Sit down, son." We went into the kitchen. I poured him a glass of bourbon. I poured myself one. We sat across from each other at my kitchen island, the same way we used to sit when he was 16 and had something to confess. He said, "When did I become this?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "I love Cordelia. I do. But I have been a coward for 3 years. Every time her mother said something cutting about you, every time Cordelia rolled her eyes when you were leaving the room, every time her father called you the developer instead of by your name, I said nothing. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I wasn't keeping the peace. I was selling you for it. I didn't say anything. Some things a man needs to say all the way through. He said, "When Theodore was born and you cried, I cried too. Not because of him. Because I realized you were going to love him better than I let you love me, and I felt ashamed, and I let Cordelia plan a baptism without you, because I didn't want to feel that shame again." I said, "Son." He said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." I said, "I forgive you." But forgiveness doesn't mean we go back to how it was. It means we go forward, and we do it differently. He said, "Tell me what to do." I said, "Don't tell me. Tell your wife." He went home that night. I don't know what he said to her. I never asked, and he never told me. But at 10:47 the next morning, Cordelia Pelham Ashcroft Thornberry showed up at my office without an appointment. Beverly buzzed me. "Wallace, your daughter-in-law is in the lobby." I said, "Send her up." She walked into my office, and she stood in front of my desk. She didn't sit down. I didn't offer her a chair. She was wearing a beige cashmere coat, and her hair was pulled back too tight. She looked like she hadn't slept. She said, "Wallace, I came to apologize." I said, "Sit down, Cordelia." She sat. She said, "I was wrong. The text was wrong. The text was wrong. The text was wrong. I want you at Theodore's baptism. I want you to walk in with us. I want you to stand at the front of the church." I said, "Why did you do it?" She didn't answer for a long time. Then she said, "My mother said you would embarrass the family." I said, "What did you say back?" She said, "I said okay." I let that sit there for a minute. I said, "Cordelia, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear me. I'm not a sophisticated man. I never have been. I came up rough. I work job sites. I have a Boston accent, and I drink the wrong wine, and my watch is the wrong brand. All of that is true. But I am the man who made it possible for your husband to wear the right watch, and I am the man who is funding the life that you and your mother have decided I'm not refined enough to participate in." She started to cry. I said, "I'm not going to make you grovel. I'm not going to stand over you, but you need to understand something, and I need you to take this home to your mother. The world that you grew up in, the world that your family told you was theirs, doesn't belong to your family anymore. It belongs to people like me, people who actually built it. We let you keep your houses and your clubs because it amuses us, and because some of us still have manners. But the moment you start treating us like the help, we remember who actually owns the building." She was crying hard now. I said, "Theodore is going to grow up in my world, not your father's. Mine, because mine is the one that's still here in 20 years. And if he's going to be raised right, he needs to know where the floor he's standing on came from." She nodded. She couldn't speak. I said, "Now, here's what's going to happen. The baptism on Sunday is canceled. There isn't time to redo it. We will reschedule for the first Sunday in November. Father Caldwell will officiate, if he's willing. We will have a small ceremony at the Advent, and we will have a reception at my house in Wellesley. There will be no string quartet, There will be Italian food and beer and people I actually like. Your parents are welcome if they want to come. They will sit in the back row, and they will not say a word about the catering. Are we clear? She nodded. And one more thing. You will write Garrison a letter, a real letter, on paper, in your hand. You will tell him exactly what you told me, that your mother said I would embarrass the family, and you said okay. He needs to read it in your handwriting, because if you can write it, you can never pretend you didn't say it. She nodded again. I said, Go home, Cordelia. She stood up. At the door, she turned around and she said, Wallace, thank you. I said, For what? She said, For not destroying us. You could have. I said, I know. I'll tell you what I didn't tell her. The Pelham Ashcrofts were 6 months behind on the Lewisburg Square mortgage. Bettina, the daughter-in-law, called me back 2 weeks later and asked if I'd consider a private restructuring. Sterling, she said, was too proud to ask. I said I'd consider it. I haven't given her an answer yet. I might not. I haven't decided whether the lesson has finished teaching itself. The baptism happened on November 6th. Father Caldwell did the ceremony. Maeve from Bramble and Bough did the flowers, and she charged me half price and refused to let me argue about it. Patricia at Verdant did the food at my house, and she put out a spread that would have made my mother cry. Thaddeus took the photos. The string quartet showed up uninvited and played for free in my living room. Sterling and his wife came. They sat in the back row. They didn't say a word about the catering. Sterling shook my hand at the end of the night, and he looked me in the eye for the first time in 3 years, and he said, Thank you for having us in your home, Wallace. It cost him a lot to say. I appreciated it. Garrison walked in with Theodore in his arms. Cordelia walked in beside him. When they got to the front of the church, Garrison turned around and looked at me. He held out his free arm. Dad, up here, with us. I walked up the aisle of the Church of the Advent. My grandson, 11 months old, reached for me as I came near. I took him in my arms, and Father Caldwell smiled and started the ceremony. I want to tell you one more thing. 3 weeks ago, Garrison came over for Sunday dinner. He brought Cordelia. He brought Theodore. They come every week now. He brought a bottle of wine. He didn't bring an expensive bottle. He brought a Chianti he'd picked up at the grocery store on the way over. He said, Dad, this is what I drink now. The fancy stuff was never me. I poured us both a glass. He said, Dad, I want to ask you something. The money, the houses, the cars, the college fund, all of it. I want to start paying you back. I said, Son, you don't have to. He said, I know I don't have to. That's why I want to. We worked out a number. He's going to pay me back over 15 years. It's going to take him a long time. He's going to have to live differently than he's been living. Cordelia is okay with that. Cordelia, it turns out, is okay with a lot of things, now that she's not pretending to be someone she isn't. I'm not going to tell you everyone changes. Some people don't. Some people get the lesson, and they reject it, and they double down on being who they were. That's their right. But sometimes, every once in a while, a person hits the wall hard enough to actually look at themselves. And when that happens, the most loving thing you can do, the only loving thing you can do, is let them feel the wall. I love my son. I love my grandson. I love, in a complicated way, my daughter-in-law, who is trying. I miss my wife every day. Money amplifies character. My father told me that. It doesn't create character. The check doesn't make the man, and it sure as hell doesn't make the family. I forgot that for a long time. I tried to write my way into a place at the table that I should have just sat down at. The thing nobody ever tells you about respect is that you can't pay for it, and you can't beg for it. You can only stand up and walk away from anyone who won't give it to you, and then wait to see if they come find you. Garrison came and found me. That's the only ending that mattered. If you've ever been the relative who pays but doesn't get a seat, leave a comment below. Tell me your story. Tell me what you did about it, or what you wish you'd done. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Real consequences. Real respect. Real families. Learning the hard way that love without dignity isn't love at all. It's just an arrangement. And arrangements end. I've thought a lot about why it took me so long to act. 43 years building a company, and I let one woman's text pin me to a couch for 40 minutes before I could even breathe. The truth is, when you love someone, you'll absorb almost anything before you'll admit they don't respect you. I absorbed it from Cordelia. I absorbed it from her mother. I absorbed it, worst of all, from Garrison, my own boy, who stood quietly by while his wife rescheduled me out of my grandson's baptism like I was a vendor she'd decided not to use. What I learned, sitting at that kitchen table at 4 a.m. making my list, is that every disrespect I'd swallowed had cost me something. Not money. Money I had. It cost me the right to call myself a man who stood his ground. Each check I wrote was a brick I handed to people who were building a wall I wasn't allowed to walk through. I did that. Nobody forced me. The hardest thing to admit in your 60s is that the trap you're in is one you helped build with your own hands. Cause and effect doesn't take days off. Cordelia treated me like furniture because I let her. Sterling Pelham Ashcroft called me the developer instead of by my name because I never once corrected him. Garrison stayed silent in rooms where he should have stood up because I kept making it easy for him. When I finally said no, when Beverly made those calls and the vendors made their choices, the whole thing came apart in a single afternoon. That's how brittle the disrespect was. It only held because I propped it up. I want to say something to anyone watching who's in the same place I was. Character is built in the small refusals. You don't wake up one morning with the strength to draw a hard line. You build it by drawing small ones, every day, with the people closest to you. The first time someone treats you like a wallet instead of a person, you correct them gently. The second time, less gently. The third time, you walk away. If you don't, you teach them that you will pay forever for the privilege of being invisible. And one day they will send you a text rescheduling you out of the most important moment of your life, and they will not even feel cruel doing it. They'll feel administrators. Wisdom for me came late. It came in the form of an assistant who'd known me for 26 years, asking why I let my daughter-in-law do what no business partner could. It came from a son standing in my foyer in the rain, finally admitting he'd sold his father for the price of peace. It came from realizing that loving someone doesn't mean catching every consequence before it lands on them. Sometimes the most loving thing a man can do is step out of the way and let the wall do its job. Garrison came back to me, not because of the money. Because, for the first time in his adult life, his father was standing somewhere he could find him.